The marble steps of Milan's family court glistened beneath a soft autumn rain. Reporters crowded the entrance, their cameras trained on the heavy oak doors. Inside, beneath chandeliers that had witnessed a century of broken vows, Italy's most feared mafia boss signed the divorce papers with a steady hand. His steel-gray eyes revealed nothing. Across the polished mahogany table, his wife quietly signed her name. No tears, no argument, no goodbye. Moments later, she walked outside. A handsome man rushed toward her through the rain. He wrapped her in a warm embrace. She smiled for the first time in months, then kissed his cheek. Behind the courthouse windows, Vincenzo Malaspina watched everything. His tattooed fist crashed against the glass. The Italian script on his neck, L'amor senza fiducia e guerra, seemed to pulse with each breath. For the first time in years, fear replaced anger, because he realized the devastating truth. He didn't lose her today. He lost her long before she signed those papers. Before we begin, thank you for spending part of your day with me. Whether you're listening from home, work, on a long drive, or winding down for the evening, I'm truly grateful you're here. Tonight's story is about love, regret, second chances, and the painful realization that the greatest battles are sometimes fought within our own hearts. Please like, share, and subscribe, and comment below where you're watching from so I can see just how far across the world this story has reached. Now, let's begin today's unforgettable story. Earlier that morning, the Malaspina estate had awakened to an unusual silence. The sprawling villa outside Milan, with its Renaissance architecture and manicured gardens, typically hummed with activity. Guards patrolled the perimeter. Staff prepared breakfast. The empire conducted its business through secure phone lines and encrypted messages. But today, the master bedroom remained dark. Vincenzo stood before the floor-length mirror, adjusting his black Armani suit with mechanical precision. His reflection revealed what years of power had crafted. A man whose presence commanded rooms before he spoke a single word. At 40, his jet-black hair remained untouched by gray, slicked back with the same discipline he applied to every aspect of his life. Every aspect except one: his marriage. The Roman lion tattooed on his right forearm caught the morning light as he reached for his cufflinks. Strength, protection, leadership. The ink told stories he rarely spoke aloud. Behind him, the bed remained untouched. Serafina had stopped sleeping there 3 months ago. He'd told himself it was temporary, a phase. Women became emotional, and eventually they remembered their place. His mother had threatened to leave his father a dozen times throughout their marriage. She never did. But Serafina was not his mother, and he was beginning to understand that he was far worse than his father had ever been. A knock interrupted his thoughts. Don Malaspina. Matteo Ricciardi's voice carried through the door. The car is ready. Vincenzo didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stared at the small photograph tucked into the corner of his mirror. A younger version of himself, perhaps 32, standing beside a woman whose smile could illuminate the darkest corners of any room. Their wedding day, 8 years ago, before the empire demanded everything. Before he forgot that some things couldn't be purchased, threatened, or controlled. He removed the photograph and slipped it into his breast pocket. Then he opened the door. Matteo stood in the hallway, his athletic frame tense beneath his tailored black suit. The scar above his left eyebrow, a reminder of a negotiation that had turned violent years ago, seemed more pronounced in the morning light. "You don't have to do this," Matteo said quietly. "The papers are ready. She wants this." "What do you want?" Vincenzo's jaw tightened. The knuckles of his right hand, tattooed with the word honor, clenched at his side. "What I want stopped mattering the moment she decided to leave. That's not true, and you know it." "Careful, Matteo." The warning carried weight. Matteo had served the Malaspina family for over 2 decades. He'd watched Vincenzo rise from his father's shadow to become one of Italy's most feared men. He'd witnessed the brutal efficiency with which his boss handled rivals, the cold calculation that governed every business decision. But he'd also watched something else. The slow erosion of a marriage that had once been the only soft place in Vincenzo's ruthless world. I'm saying this as someone who's known you since we were children, Matteo continued, undeterred. Pride destroyed your father. Don't let it destroy you. My father was weak. Your father never lost your mother. The words landed like a blade between ribs. Vincenzo said nothing. He walked past Matteo, his Italian leather shoes echoing against the marble floors. The cathedral tattoo on his left forearm, family, loyalty, redemption, seemed to mock him with every step. The empire he'd built could bring nations to their knees, but it couldn't make one woman stay. Across the estate, in the guest quarters she'd occupied for the past 91 days, Serafina Bellandi finished packing the last of her belongings. She moved with quiet efficiency, folding silk blouses and cashmere sweaters into a leather suitcase that had been a gift from Vincenzo 3 years ago. He'd presented it after returning from a business trip to Paris, claiming it had reminded him of her. She'd later discovered he'd sent his assistant to purchase it. The small lies had accumulated over the years, building walls she could no longer climb. But it wasn't the lies that had broken her. It was the silence. The way he looked through her at dinner parties, as if she were another decorative element of his carefully curated life. The cancelled anniversaries, the missed birthdays, the nights she'd fallen asleep alone while he conducted business that apparently couldn't wait. The final blow had come 4 months ago. She'd collapsed during a charity event she'd organized. Exhaustion, the doctor said, complicated by stress and what they'd carefully termed emotional depletion. She'd spent 3 days in the hospital. Vincenzo had visited twice. Both times, he'd spent the majority of the visit on his phone. When she'd finally asked him, voice cracking, pride abandoned, if their marriage meant anything to him anymore, he'd looked at her with those steel-gray eyes and said words she would never forget. You're my wife. That should be enough. It wasn't a declaration of love. It was a statement of ownership. And Serafina had finally understood the difference. She zipped the suitcase closed and caught her reflection in the vanity mirror. At 32, she remained the woman Vincenzo had married, though grief had sharpened her features and stolen some of the light from her hazel eyes. Her dark espresso-brown hair fell in soft waves past her shoulders, and the elegant navy dress she'd chosen for today's proceedings fit her slim frame with quiet sophistication. She looked like a woman attending a funeral. In many ways, she was. A soft knock drew her attention. Serafina? The voice belonged to Rosa, the housekeeper who had been with the family longer than Serafina's marriage. The car is waiting. Thank you, Rosa. I'll be down in a moment. She heard the elderly woman's footsteps retreat, then allowed herself one final look around the room that had become her sanctuary. The guest quarters were smaller than the master suite she'd once shared with her husband, but they were hers. Every book on the shelves, every photograph on the walls, every carefully chosen piece of art. They reflected a woman she'd almost forgotten existed. A woman with dreams beyond being someone's possession. She picked up her phone and read the message that had arrived an hour ago. I'll be waiting outside the courthouse. Whatever happens, you're not alone. Alessandro. Her cousin's words brought the first genuine smile she'd felt in months. Alessandro Vitali had been her closest friend since childhood. More brother than cousin. More confidant than any therapist could ever be. He'd flown in from Rome specifically to support her through today's proceedings, a gesture that had meant more than he would ever know. She typed a quick response. Thank you. For everything. Then she picked up her suitcase, took one last breath, and walked out of the room. She didn't look back. The drive to Milan's family court took 47 minutes. Serafina spent the journey staring out the window, watching the Italian countryside transform into urban sprawl. The rain had begun somewhere around the city limits, transforming the gray morning into something appropriately somber. Her phone buzzed repeatedly with messages she didn't read. Friends offering support. Her grandmother's daily prayer. A final, desperate text from her mother-in-law begging her to reconsider. She ignored them all. When the car pulled up to the courthouse, she saw the reporters immediately. Dozens of them, clustered beneath umbrellas and camera equipment, their attention fixed on the building's entrance like predators waiting for wounded prey. Of course, the press had discovered the proceedings. Vincenzo Malaspina divorcing his wife of 8 years was front-page news. The Mafia boss whose name made grown men tremble, whose empire stretched across Italy and beyond, whose face had graced magazine covers as both a legitimate businessman and a suspected criminal. That man's personal life was public property, or so the media believed. Signora Malaspina. Her driver, an older man named Carlo who had been assigned to her 4 years ago, met her eyes in the rearview mirror. "There's a service entrance around the back. I can take you there instead." "No." She straightened her shoulders. "I've spent too many years hiding. Today, I walk through the front door." Carlo nodded, respect flickering across his weathered features. He opened her door. The cameras exploded. Serafina stepped into the rain, ignoring the shouted questions and flashing lights. She moved with quiet dignity up the marble steps, her heels clicking against stone that had witnessed countless endings. Inside, the courthouse smelled of old wood and older secrets. A clerk directed her to a private conference room on the 3rd floor, and she followed the instructions without speaking. Her heart hammered against her ribs, not from fear, but from the strange finality of what she was about to do. 8 years. 8 years of her life, signed away with a pen. She pushed open the conference room door, and there he was. Vincenzo stood by the window, his back to her, his silhouette outlined by gray morning light. His black suit fit his broad shoulders perfectly, and even from this angle, she could see the tension coiled in every muscle. The Italian script on his neck was partially visible above his collar. L'amor senza fiducia è guerra. Love without trust is war. How fitting. Their lawyers occupied opposite ends of a mahogany table that could have seated 12. Legal documents spread across its surface like a paper battlefield. Serafina. Vincenzo turned at the sound of the door. His steel-gray eyes met hers, and for one devastating moment, she saw something she hadn't expected. Pain. Real, unguarded pain. It vanished almost instantly, replaced by the cold mask he wore like armor. "You came," he said. "Of course I came. This is what you wanted." A muscle twitched in his jaw. "I believe you're the one who filed the papers. I filed them because you made it clear our marriage meant nothing beyond possession." She moved to her designated chair, her movements precise and controlled. "I waited 8 years for you to prove me wrong. And now," she met his gaze without flinching, "now I've stopped waiting." The words hung between them like smoke after a gunshot. Vincenzo's hands curled at his sides, the tattooed knuckles, honor y verit, white with pressure. His lawyers exchanged nervous glances. Even in a room full of people, the intensity between husband and wife threatened to crack the walls. "We should proceed." Serafina's attorney, a silver-haired woman named Lucia Ferro, broke the silence. "The terms have been agreed upon by both parties. All that remains are the signatures." "Wait." Everyone looked at Vincenzo. He stepped closer to the table, his eyes never leaving Serafina. "You won't reconsider?" "No." "Even if I asked?" Something shifted in her chest. A door that had been slowly closing for years finally clicked shut. "You didn't ask, Vincenzo. In 8 years of marriage, you never asked for anything. You demanded. You expected. You assumed." Her voice remained steady despite the storm raging beneath her calm exterior. "Asking requires acknowledging that someone else has a choice. You never gave me that." The silence that followed was suffocating. Finally, Vincenzo moved to his designated seat. He picked up the pen, and with a steady hand that betrayed nothing, he signed his name. Serafina watched the ink flow across the paper, watched the legal dissolution of everything they had built. Her turn came next, and she accepted the pen without hesitation. She signed her name. Clean, clear, final. The divorce will be finalized within 30 days. Lucia gathered the documents. Until then, the separation agreement remains in effect. Serafina stood. She didn't look at Vincenzo. "Goodbye," she said to the room. Then she walked out. The rain had intensified during the proceedings. Serafina emerged from the courthouse to find the reporters still waiting, their questions louder now, more desperate for a reaction. She ignored them all, scanning the crowd for the one face she needed to see. Serafina! The voice cut through the chaos. Alessandro Vitali pushed through the sea of umbrellas, his tall frame and classic navy suit making him easy to spot. His dark brown hair was damp from the rain, and his friendly smile carried a warmth that felt like coming home. He reached her in seconds. "You did it," he said, wrapping his arms around her in a fierce embrace. "You actually did it." She melted into the hug, allowing herself one moment of vulnerability. "I almost couldn't, when I saw him standing there. But you did." He pulled back, his hands on her shoulders. "That's what matters." Without thinking, she rose on her toes and kissed his cheek. A simple gesture. A thank you between family. An expression of relief and gratitude and love. The kind of love shared between people who had grown up together, who had weathered every storm side by side. But from the third-floor window of the courthouse, where Vincenzo Malaspina stood frozen behind the glass, it looked like something else entirely. It looked like his wife, who hadn't shed a single tear during their divorce, was embracing another man, kissing another man, smiling at another man. The roar that built in his chest was primal, uncontrolled, and utterly devastating. His tattooed fist crashed against the window. "Lei è ancora mia. She's still mine." The words echoed through the courthouse, shattering the professional silence, announcing to lawyers and clerks and anyone within earshot that Italy's most feared mafia boss had just lost every shred of composure. Outside, the reporters captured Serafina and Alessandro looking up at the window. They captured Vincenzo's devastated expression. They captured the moment a man realized that power meant nothing when the woman he loved had found happiness without him. But they missed what happened next. The quiet transformation on Serafina's face as she heard her husband's voice. Not anger, not love, only the composed strength of a woman who had finally stopped waiting. She held Vincenzo's gaze for 3 heartbeats. Then she took Alessandro's arm and walked away. That evening, the Malaspina estate descended into chaos. Vincenzo hadn't spoken a word since returning from the courthouse. He'd locked himself in his study, a cavernous room lined with first-edition books and Renaissance paintings, and refused every attempt at contact. Matteo stood outside the door, listening to the sounds of destruction within. Glass shattering, wood splintering, years of controlled rage finally finding release. When the noise finally stopped, he knocked. "Go away. It's me." A pause. Then the door opened. Vincenzo looked like a man who had survived a natural disaster. His suit jacket was gone. His dress shirt, unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves rolled to expose both forearm tattoos, was disheveled. His hair had escaped its careful styling, falling across his forehead in black waves. But his eyes were what stopped Matteo cold. They were red-rimmed. The great Vincenzo Malaspina had been crying. "Don't say anything," Vincenzo warned, his voice hoarse. "Not a single word." Matteo entered the study, surveying the damage. A crystal decanter lay shattered against the far wall. Several paintings hung crooked. A bookshelf had been overturned, its contents scattered across the Persian rug. Who was he? Vincenzo demanded. "The man she was with." Don't lie to me, Matteo. You're loyal, but you're not stupid. You know everything that happens in my world. So tell me." His voice cracked on the last word. "Who was the man kissing my wife?" Matteo chose his next words carefully. "His name is Alessandro Vitali. He's Serafina's cousin. They've known each other since childhood. He's more like a brother to her. He works as an architect in Rome and has been married to his wife, Elena, for 7 years. They have 3 children. The information landed like a physical blow. Vincenzo staggered backward, catching himself on the edge of his desk. "Her cousin," he repeated. "Yes. A married man with children. Yes. And the kiss was on the cheek. A gesture of familial affection after a difficult day." Matteo's voice gentled. "She wasn't meeting a lover, Vincenzo. She was being supported by family. The family you should have been to her." The words sliced deeper than any blade. Vincenzo sank into his chair, the leather groaning beneath his weight. His hands covered his face, the tattooed knuckles, honori verit, pressing against his eyelids as if he could push back the reality crashing down around him. I screamed, he whispered, in front of the reporters, in front of everyone. I called her mine like she was property. You did. They all saw. They did. And she. He dropped his hands, revealing eyes that held nothing but devastation. She looked at me like I was a stranger, like everything we had meant nothing. Matteo lowered himself into the chair across from his boss. His friend, though neither of them often acknowledged that truth. What did you expect? He asked quietly. You spent 8 years treating her like an accessory, a decoration, a symbol of your success rather than a partner in your life. She stayed longer than most women would have. I thought she understood. Understood what? The demands of my position, the responsibilities, the excuses. Matteo's voice sharpened. I've watched you sacrifice your marriage on the altar of empire for nearly a decade, Vincenzo. I've watched you cancel dinners and miss anniversaries and treat her presence as something guaranteed rather than something earned. And I've watched her slowly fade. You never said anything. I tried. Several times. You didn't want to hear it. The truth settled like a stone in Vincenzo's chest. He thought of all the moments he'd dismissed. The way Serafina's eyes had stopped lighting up when he entered a room. The conversations that grew shorter, more formal, more empty. The night she'd finally moved to the guest quarters and he'd convinced himself it was temporary, that she'd come back when she calmed down. She hadn't come back. And now she was gone. What do I do? The question emerged broken, stripped of every defense he'd ever built. How do I fix this? Matteo studied him for a long moment. You can't, he said finally. Not the way you're thinking. You can't scheme your way back into her heart. You can't threaten or manipulate or demand. Those tools don't work on love. Then what? You change. Actually change. Not the performance of change designed to get what you want, but genuine transformation. You become the man she needed you to be 8 years ago. And then, Matteo stood. You hope it's not too late. He moved toward the door, then paused. She's staying with her grandmother in Amalfi, Luciana Belandi's estate. I'd recommend giving her space before you do anything rash. Matteo. He turned. Thank you. The words cost Vincenzo something. Pride, perhaps. Or the illusion that he didn't need anyone. For telling me the truth. Someone has to. Then he was gone. And Vincenzo was alone. 2 weeks crawled by like years. The tabloids had a field day with the courthouse scene. Malaspina meltdown screamed the headlines, accompanied by photographs of Vincenzo's anguished face pressed against the glass. His business associates pretended not to notice. His rivals began circling like sharks scenting blood in the water. But it was the silence from Serafina that nearly destroyed him. He'd written 4 letters, each one torn up before completion. He'd picked up his phone 100 times, only to set it down again. What could he possibly say? I'm sorry I treated you like property? I'm sorry I forgot that love requires effort? I'm sorry I didn't realize what I had until you stopped giving me chances to realize it? The words felt hollow, inadequate, like offering a bandage for an amputation. On the 15th day after the divorce was signed, he received a call that changed everything. Don Malaspina. The voice on the other end belonged to Romano, one of his senior operatives. We have a problem. What kind of problem? Leone Gherardi has been making moves. Unusual moves. Our contacts in Sicily say he's been meeting with several of our associates, offering better terms, suggesting that your recent personal difficulties have made you vulnerable. The name sent ice through Vincenzo's veins. Leone Gherardi, 49 years old, silver-threaded dark hair, cold green eyes that revealed nothing. The head of the Gherardi family had been Vincenzo's rival for over a decade, though their conflicts had remained mostly cold, a chess game of territory and influence rather than open warfare. If Leone sensed weakness, what kind of offers? Vincenzo asked. Protection, opportunity, the implication that your empire is about to crumble. Romano's voice tightened. He's also been asking questions. About what? About your wife. The world went silent. Explain, Vincenzo said softly. He knows she's in Amalfi. He knows she's staying with her grandmother. And he's been making comments, publicly, at gatherings, about how careless it is for a woman so connected to the Malaspina family to be left unprotected. The Roman lion on Vincenzo's forearm seemed to burn. Is that a threat? It sounds like one. Or a test. Either way, Signora Malaspina is exposed. And if Gherardi decides to make a move, he didn't need to finish. Vincenzo understood. The divorce had been a personal tragedy. But it was also a strategic vulnerability. Serafina was no longer under his protection, at least not officially. Their separation had been widely publicized. If Leone Gherardi wanted to hurt Vincenzo, wanted to demonstrate that the great Malaspina boss could be wounded, there was no cleaner target than the woman who had just walked away from him. Increase surveillance around the Bellandi estate, Vincenzo ordered. I want 24-hour coverage. Discreet. She can't know. And if Gherardi makes a move? Vincenzo's grip on the phone tightened. Then God help him, he said quietly. Because I won't. The Amalfi Coast had always been Serafina's sanctuary. As a child, she'd spent every summer at her grandmother's estate, a centuries-old villa perched on cliffs overlooking the Tyrrhenian Sea. The gardens overflowed with lemon trees and bougainvillea. The air smelled of salt and jasmine. The world felt slower here, softer, more forgiving. She needed that forgiveness now. In the 2 weeks since the divorce, she'd begun to rediscover pieces of herself she'd forgotten existed. The girl who used to paint watercolors of the sunset. The woman who loved cooking elaborate meals from her grandmother's recipes. The person who could sit in silence without feeling like she was waiting for someone else to fill it. But healing wasn't linear. Some nights, she still reached for him in her sleep. You're thinking too loudly, Nipotina. Her grandmother's voice drifted from the doorway. Serafina turned from the window where she'd been watching the sunset paint the sea in shades of gold and crimson. Luciana Bellandi stood wrapped in her signature black dress. Silver hair swept elegantly upward, posture straight despite her 70 years. I didn't hear you come in, Nana. You weren't listening. You were lost. Luciana moved to sit beside her on the window seat, her weathered hands reaching for Serafina's. Where were you? Milan, she admitted quietly. The courthouse. That moment when he shouted like a wounded animal and proved he never understood what he had. Serafina flinched. That's harsh. It's true. Luciana's grip tightened. I loved that boy when you married him. I saw the potential in him, the capacity for devotion beneath all that armor. But potential means nothing if it's never realized. He wasn't always like this. No, he wasn't. Luciana's eyes softened with memory. I remember your wedding, the way he looked at you like you were the first light he'd ever seen. The vows he made with such conviction that even I believed them. What happened? Power happened. Fear happened. The same poison that destroyed his father's marriage began destroying his. Luciana touched her granddaughter's face. But understanding why someone hurt you doesn't mean you must endure it. You were right to leave. Then why does it feel like I'm missing a limb? Because love doesn't end when we want it to. It lingers. It haunts. It whispers what-ifs into our dreams. Luciana stood, moving toward the door. But pain is not a prison, Nipotina. It's a passage. Walk through it, and something new waits on the other side. She paused at the threshold. Dinner will be ready in an hour. Alessandro called. He's coming this weekend with Elena and the children. I thought you might enjoy the company. A genuine smile touched Serafina's lips. That sounds perfect. After her grandmother left, she remained by the window, watching the last light fade from the sky. Somewhere beyond those darkening waters, in the chaos of Milan, a man she had loved for a decade was facing the consequences of his choices. She didn't wish him pain, but she couldn't save him either. Not anymore. 3 days later, the threats became impossible to ignore. Serafina had taken to walking along the coastal paths each morning. a routine that helped clear her mind and strengthen her body after months of stress-induced weakness. The cliffs offered spectacular views, and the physical exertion provided something productive to do with the restless energy that plagued her. She didn't notice the car following her, but Vincenzo's men did. Black sedan, Roman plates, 2 occupants. The report reached Vincenzo within hours. They've been tracking her movements for 3 days. Same vehicle appeared near the village market yesterday when she went shopping with her grandmother. Vincenzo stood before the windows of his study, watching nothing. Can we identify them? We're working on it. But the driving patterns suggest professional surveillance. This isn't amateur hour. Gherardi. Most likely. His jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached. The cathedral tattoo on his left forearm. Family, loyalty, redemption. Seemed to pulse with urgency. I need to go to Amalfi. Signora Malaspina explicitly requested no contact. Romano reminded him. Through her attorney. If you show up, she can hate me. She can throw me out. She can call the police and have me arrested. Vincenzo turned, and his eyes held something his men had never seen before. Fear. Pure, unguarded fear. But I will not sit in Milan while the woman I love becomes a target because of my failures. He moved toward the door. Prepare the car. We leave within the hour. What should I tell the staff? Vincenzo paused. Tell them I'm going to do something I should have done years ago, he said quietly. I'm going to put her first. The drive to Amalfi took 5 hours through winding mountain roads and coastal highways that seemed designed to test human endurance. Vincenzo spent the journey in silence, rehearsing words that felt increasingly inadequate. He hadn't called ahead. He couldn't. If he warned her, she might flee, might refuse to see him, might make it impossible for him to ensure her safety. So he would show up uninvited, unwanted, and hope that whatever remained of their connection would allow her to hear him out. It wasn't a good plan. It was the only one he had. The Bellandi estate came into view as the sun began its descent, a sprawling Mediterranean villa that had housed Serafina's family for generations. Lemon groves flanked the approaching road, and the sound of the sea provided constant background music. Vincenzo's heart hammered against his ribs as the car stopped before the iron gates. Don Malaspina. The intercom crackled to life with the voice of an older male servant. You are not expected. No, I'm not. Signora Bellandi has given instructions. I understand. But I need to speak with my wife. Your former wife, sir? The correction landed like a blow. Yes, he managed. My former wife. Please, it's urgent. A matter of her safety. Silence stretched across the intercom. Then a different voice replaced the servant's. Older, feminine, unmistakably commanding. Vincenzo Malaspina. Luciana Bellandi's tone could have frozen the Mediterranean itself. You have considerable nerve appearing at my home. Signora Bellandi. With respect. Respect would have been treating my granddaughter like a partner rather than a possession. Respect would have been showing up when she was in the hospital rather than spending your visits on the phone. Respect. She's in danger. The words cut through Luciana's lecture. Silence. Explain, she said finally. Leone Gherardi has been making threats. His men have been following Serafina for days. I have reason to believe he intends to use her as leverage against me. Vincenzo's voice cracked. I know I have no right to be here. I know I've failed her in every way that matters. But I will not let my failures cost her life. Please. The silence stretched longer this time. Then the gates began to open. She's in the garden, Luciana said. West Terrace. And Vincenzo. Yes. If you hurt her again in any way through any action, I will make you wish Leone Gherardi had found you first. The intercom clicked off. The West Terrace overlooked the sea. Serafina sat on a stone bench beneath an ancient olive tree, a book open in her lap, though she didn't appear to be reading. The sunset painted her profile in shades of gold, and the breeze carried her dark hair across her shoulders like a silk curtain. She was heartbreakingly beautiful, and she looked at peace. Vincenzo hesitated at the edge of the terrace, suddenly aware of how intrusive his presence was. She had found tranquility here, the calm that had eluded her throughout their marriage. Who was he to shatter that? But then he remembered the black sedan, the surveillance, the threat that could arrive at any moment. He stepped forward. Serafina. She didn't startle at his voice, didn't jump or gasp or show any sign of surprise. Instead, she simply closed her book and turned to face him with the same quiet composure she'd shown at the courthouse. I wondered how long it would take, she said. You knew I was coming? I knew you wouldn't stay away. You never could accept when something left your control. She stood, and the evening light caught the hazel of her eyes. Why are you here, Vincenzo? Because you're in danger. Something flickered across her face. What kind of danger? He told her everything. Leon Gherardi, the surveillance, the implied threats, the escalating moves against his business. By the time he finished, the sun had fully set and the garden had transformed into a landscape of shadows and starlight. Serafina listened without interruption. When he stopped speaking, she was quiet for a long moment. So you came here to protect me? Yes. Not to apologize, not to make amends, not to address any of the reasons I left. Her voice remained steady, but something sharp lurked beneath the words. You came because a rival threatened your property. That's not, isn't it? She took a step toward him, and even in her simple summer dress, she radiated a power he'd never fully appreciated. You screamed across a courthouse square that I was still yours. Not that you loved me, not that you were sorry, that I was yours, like a car, like an estate, like another asset in your portfolio. I was jealous of my cousin. The words landed like a slap. I didn't know, he admitted. In that moment, I saw a man holding you, and I lost your mind? Created a tabloid scandal? Confirmed every suspicion the public has ever had about who you really are. She shook her head. I spent 8 years trying to see the man beneath the mask, Vincenzo. I defended you to everyone who warned me. I believed that the boy I fell in love with still existed somewhere inside the monster you were becoming. He does. Then where has he been? The question hung between them like a blade. Vincenzo thought of 1,000 responses. Excuses. Explanations. The legitimate pressures of running an empire, the enemies who required constant vigilance, the simple truth that he had never learned how to be soft. But none of them were answers. They were all just different versions of the same avoidance. I don't know, he said finally. I lost him somewhere. In the work, the power, the constant need to prove I was strong enough to hold everything together. His voice roughened. I think I was so afraid of being weak like my father that I became something worse. I became cold. Yes. And I lost you because of it. Yes. He took a step toward her, and to his astonishment, she didn't retreat. I'm not here just because of Gherardi, he said quietly. I mean, that's why I came now, tonight, instead of waiting. But I've spent the last 2 weeks trying to figure out how to reach you, what to say. How to make you understand that I know I failed you. Understanding isn't enough. I know. Apologies aren't enough either. I know that too. Then what are you offering? It was the question that had haunted him since the courthouse. The question that had kept him awake through sleepless nights, staring at the ceiling of their bedroom. No, his bedroom now, searching for an answer worthy of her pain. Change, he said. Real change. Not the kind designed to win you back, but the kind I need to become regardless of the outcome. He reached out, his tattooed hand hovering near her face but not touching. I'm asking for a chance to prove that I can be different, whether or not you ever take me back. Serafina studied him. The man before her bore little resemblance to the cold boss who had signed their divorce papers. His suit was rumpled. His usually perfect hair fell across his forehead. And his steel-gray eyes held something she'd rarely seen in their marriage. Vulnerability. And if I don't believe you, then I'll protect you anyway. And when this is over, when Gherardi is dealt with and you're safe, I'll leave you alone. Forever, if that's what you want. She searched his face for signs of deception. Found none. 1 week, she said finally. You have 1 week to deal with whatever threat you think exists. During that time, we will be civil, professional, nothing more. Serafina. Those are my terms, Vincenzo. Take them or leave. The tattooed script on his neck seemed to pulse with each breath. L'amor senza fiducia è guerra. Love without trust is war. I'll take them, he said quietly. Good. She moved past him toward the house, then paused. There's a guest room in the east wing, far from mine. I'll have Rosa prepare it. Thank you. She didn't acknowledge the gratitude. She simply walked away. But for the first time since the courthouse, Vincenzo felt something other than despair. Hope, small, fragile, but real. The next 3 days passed in tense proximity. Vincenzo coordinated his security team's efforts from the Bellandi estate, working the phones and encrypted channels that connected him to his network across Italy. The surveillance on Serafina intensified, now conducted by his own people, watching for any sign of Gherardi's approach. Serafina observed everything. She'd agreed to limited restrictions on her movements, no more solitary walks along the cliffs, accompanied trips to the village, heightened awareness of her surroundings. But she refused to become a prisoner in her grandmother's home. If Gherardi wants to start a war, she told Vincenzo during one of their brief, tense conversations, hiding won't stop him. It will only delay the inevitable. You underestimate how much I'm willing to do to keep you safe. You underestimate how tired I am of being protected instead of respected. The words had silenced him. On the 4th day, Alessandro arrived with his family. Vincenzo watched from a second-floor window as Serafina rushed to greet her cousin in the circular driveway. Alessandro's wife Elena, a lovely woman with auburn hair and a warm smile, embraced her next, while 3 children under 10 spilled from the car in a chaos of energy and laughter. For one brief moment, Serafina's face transformed. The grief that had shadowed her features since the divorce lifted entirely. She swept the youngest child, a girl of perhaps 4, into her arms and spun her around while the older 2 demanded equal attention. This was the woman Vincenzo had married. The woman he'd forgotten existed. You're staring. He turned to find Luciana watching him with knowing eyes. Your granddaughter is extraordinary, he said. I'm aware. I wasted so much time. Also aware. Luciana moved to stand beside him at the window. She told me about your conversation, your terms. And I think you're gambling on a hand you don't deserve to win. The older woman's voice softened slightly. But I've never known you to back down from long odds. I won't fail her again. Pretty words. I mean them. Then prove it. Luciana turned from the window. Not with grand gestures or dramatic declarations. With consistency. With patience. With the daily, tedious work of being present when it's inconvenient and quiet when you want to speak. She left him alone with his thoughts. Below, Serafina was laughing at something Alessandro had said. The sound carried through the glass like a memory of everything he'd lost. That evening, dinner became an exercise in careful diplomacy. The Bellandi estate's formal dining room could have seated 30, but Luciana had arranged a more intimate setting around one end of the massive table. Candles flickered in antique holders. The scent of her grandmother's legendary lamb filled the air. And Vincenzo found himself seated across from the man he'd nearly accused of being his wife's lover. So, Alessandro broke the breadbasket silence with characteristic directness. You're the reason my cousin has spent the last 2 weeks crying into her pillow. Alessandro, Serafina's voice carried a warning. What? He should know. You've been through hell because of him. The least he can do is face what he's done. Vincenzo set down his wine glass. You're right, he said quietly. The response seemed to catch Alessandro off guard. I'm right. Yes, I've caused her immeasurable pain. I've failed her as a husband, as a partner, and as a man. And I have no defense for any of it. Vincenzo met the other man's eyes steadily. I also owe you an apology. What I assumed at the courthouse, what I implied by my behavior, was insulting to both of you. Alessandro studied him for a long moment. My wife threatened to fly to Milan and tell you exactly what she thought of your behavior. he said finally. I had to talk her down for 3 days. From across the table, Elena raised her wineglass. I've changed my mind. I think I like watching him grovel. Serafina choked on a laugh. It broke the tension more effectively than any peace offering could have. The rest of the dinner proceeded more smoothly, though wariness remained thick beneath the surface pleasantries. Vincenzo found himself observing rather than participating, watching the easy affection between family members, the way Alessandro's children demanded attention from their favorite aunt, the genuine warmth that Serafina had been starving for. This was what he should have given her. This sense of belonging. This feeling of being chosen rather than claimed. After the children had been put to bed and the adults had retreated to the terrace for digestives, Vincenzo excused himself to check in with his security team. The update that awaited him shattered the evening's fragile peace. Boss, we have a problem. Romano's voice carried that particular tension Vincenzo had learned to recognize over 2 decades. Report. 3 of our border positions were hit simultaneously tonight. Professional work. No survivors. The words landed like physical blows. Casualties? 17 men total across all 3 locations. Plus the asset losses. Romano's voice tightened. This wasn't a probe, Don Malaspina. This was a declaration. Gherardi. We're still confirming, but the coordination suggests it. He's not testing anymore. He's moving. Vincenzo's blood ran cold. And Serafina? No immediate threats that we've detected. But if he's willing to strike this openly against fortified positions. Romano didn't finish the thought. He didn't need to. Double the protection around the Bellandi estate. Triple it if necessary. I want armed response teams within 3 minutes of any alarm. Already in motion, boss. But there's something else. What? Romano's hesitation was uncharacteristic. One of the men we lost tonight, Fabio Martinelli, he wasn't just killed. He was executed. Throat cut, left as a message. What message? His body was found holding a photograph. Vincenzo's grip on the phone tightened until his tattooed knuckles went white. What photograph? Your wedding photo, boss. The one from the newspapers. The world seemed to tilt. Someone cut out your face, Romano continued, and wrote something on the back. In Gherardi's hand, we confirmed the writing sample. What did it say? She won't save you, but she'll suffer for your sins. The phone nearly shattered in Vincenzo's grip. Find him, he said softly. Find Leone Gherardi. And when you do, notify me immediately. What do you want us to do with him? Vincenzo thought of the woman on the terrace, laughing with her family, unaware that a monster was circling. Nothing, he said. He's mine. He ended the call. His hands were shaking, not from fear of what Gherardi might do to him. He had faced death more times than he could count. But the threat against Serafina, he had brought this upon her. His lifestyle, his choices, his enemies, even divorced, even separated, even free. She would never truly escape the danger of having once belonged to him. He moved back toward the terrace, his mind racing through possibilities and countermeasures. But before he could reach the doors, a small voice stopped him. Signore, he turned. Alessandro's youngest daughter, the one Serafina had spun in her arms earlier, stood in the hallway in her nightgown, clutching a stuffed rabbit. You should be sleeping, Vincenzo said gently, surprised by how natural the words felt. I had a bad dream. The child's eyes were wide. About a monster. Something twisted in his chest. He knelt to her level, his designer suit protesting the movement. Can I tell you a secret about monsters? He asked. She nodded. They're only scary in the dark. When you turn on the light, they're not nearly as powerful as they seemed. But what if the light doesn't work? Vincenzo thought of Leone Gherardi, of threats and violence and the endless cycle of power his world demanded. Then you find someone to stand beside you, he said quietly. Someone who isn't afraid of the dark. Someone who will protect you until the morning comes. The child studied him with that unnerving perceptiveness common to very young people. Are you the monster? She asked. Or the one who protects? The question hit harder than any blow. I'm trying to be the second one, he admitted. I haven't always been good at it. But I'm trying. She seemed to consider this. Zia Sarah said you made her cry. I did. Many times. I'm sorry for that. Did you tell her sorry? I started to. I need to do more. The child nodded with the grave authority of a judge delivering a verdict. Then you should try harder, she said. My papa says sorry isn't just words. It's what you do after. Before Vincenzo could respond, Elena appeared at the end of the hallway. Chiara, what are you doing out of bed? Talking to the monster who's trying to be better, the child said matter-of-factly. She padded toward her mother without a backward glance, leaving Vincenzo kneeling in the hallway with her words echoing through his skull. Sorry isn't just words. It's what you do after. He didn't tell Serafina about Gherardi's message that night. He should have. He knew he should have. But watching her on the terrace, surrounded by family, looking more at peace than he'd seen her in years, he couldn't bring himself to shatter it. So he doubled the security quietly. He sent coded messages to his lieutenants across Italy. He prepared for war while she laughed at her cousin's stories, unaware that darkness was closing in. It was the wrong choice. He realized that 2 days later, when Serafina disappeared. The morning had begun normally. Serafina had eaten breakfast with her grandmother, helped Elena manage the children, and announced her intention to visit the village market for fresh ingredients for dinner. Vincenzo's security team had accompanied her at a discreet distance, or so they'd believed. 2 hours later, Romano's call shattered everything. She's gone. The words stopped Vincenzo's heart. Explain. The market. Our men had eyes on her. She went into a shop. Fabric merchant. Narrow entrance. Crowded space. Took longer than expected to emerge. They investigated. And, back in trance, led to an alley. The alley led to... Romano's voice cracked. We found signs of a struggle. And this. A photograph arrived on Vincenzo's phone seconds later. Serafina's pearl earring. The one she never removed. The one he'd given her on their first anniversary. Lying on cobblestones. Beside it, a note. If you want her breathing, come alone. Coordinates follow. Midnight tonight. LG. Vincenzo read the message 3 times. Then he destroyed his study. Books flew from shelves. Furniture crashed against walls. The antique desk his father had purchased 50 years ago splintered beneath his fists. When the rage finally subsided, he stood in the ruins of the room, breathing hard, blood trickling from his split knuckles. The tattoos across his forearms seemed to pulse with meaning. The Roman lion, protection, strength, leadership. The cathedral, family, loyalty, redemption. Honor e verita, honor and truth. He had failed every single one of those values. And the woman who had taught him what they truly meant was now in the hands of a man who would break her just to prove he could. Don Malaspina? Matteo stood in the doorway, having arrived from Milan within hours of the initial attack on Vincenzo's positions. He has her. I know. Romano briefed me. He wants me to come alone, which you absolutely cannot do. Vincenzo turned. His eyes held something that made even Matteo, who had faced down armies beside him, take a step backward. I am going to go alone, Vincenzo said quietly. I am going to find Leone Gherardi, and I am going to take him apart piece by piece until he tells me where she is. You'll be walking into a trap. Yes. He'll kill you. He'll try. And Serafina? If you die tonight, who protects her then? The question landed like a blade between ribs. But Vincenzo had already calculated the odds. If I don't go, he said slowly, he kills her to send a message. If I send men instead of myself, he kills her to punish my cowardice. The only chance she has is if I face him directly and survive. The odds are terrible. I know. Vincenzo moved past his oldest friend, pausing at the door. But I've spent 8 years proving that I couldn't put her first. Tonight, I prove that I can. Or die trying. Or die trying. Vincenzo agreed quietly. He didn't look back. The coordinates led to an abandoned factory complex outside Naples. Once, the facility had manufactured industrial chemicals. Now it stood as a monument to economic decay. Rusted pipes, shattered windows, and shadows that seemed to breathe with malicious intent. Vincenzo arrived at midnight, alone, as instructed. His security team had argued, threatened, and finally fallen silent when they realized nothing would change his course. They maintained a perimeter half a mile out, close enough to provide backup if he called, far enough to satisfy the terms of Leone's demands. The factory entrance yawned before him like the mouth of some mechanical beast. He entered without hesitation. The interior smelled of decay and chemical residue. Emergency lighting cast everything in bloody red hues. His footsteps echoed against concrete floors as he moved deeper into the complex, following the trail of dim lights that clearly marked his intended path. They wanted him to find them. They were making it easy. Too easy. But he kept walking, because somewhere in this maze of industrial waste, Serafina was waiting. And he would not abandon her again. The confrontation came in what had once been the factory's main processing floor. Massive vats lined the walls, their rust-eaten hulks casting strange shadows. Industrial catwalks crisscrossed overhead. And in the center of the space, beneath a single harsh spotlight, Serafina. She was bound to a chair, her hands tied behind her back, her dark hair disheveled. Blood stained her temple, evidence of a struggle, but her hazel eyes were blazing with defiance rather than fear. When she saw Vincenzo emerge from the shadows, something complicated flickered across her face. Relief, anger, anguish. "You shouldn't have come," she said. "There was no version of tonight where I didn't come. He's going to kill you. He's going to try." Still so arrogant. The voice came from above, and Vincenzo's gaze snapped upward to find Leone Gherardi descending a metal staircase from one of the catwalks. The rival boss moved with casual elegance, his silver-threaded dark hair impeccable, his cold green eyes gleaming with satisfaction. His luxury suit probably cost more than most people earned in a year, a conscious display of power even in this setting of decay. Vincenzo Malaspina. Leone's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Thank you for being so predictable. Let her go. Straight to negotiations? No pleasantries? No questions about how I knew exactly when and where to take her." Leone reached the floor and began walking a slow circle around his captive. "I've been planning this for months, studying you, your weaknesses, your blind spots." His hand brushed Serafina's shoulder, and she flinched. Vincenzo's control nearly shattered. "Your men betrayed you, you know," Leone continued conversationally. "At least 3 of them. It was surprisingly easy to purchase their loyalty. You've been so distracted lately, so consumed by your personal drama. Men notice when their leader's attention wanders. Names. Later, perhaps. If there is a later." Leone stopped his circling, positioning himself behind Serafina's chair. "Do you know why I chose her? Because you're a coward who strikes at what can't fight back. Because I wanted you to feel it." Leone's mask cracked slightly, revealing genuine hatred beneath. "You remember my nephew, don't you? Giovanni?" Vincenzo's jaw tightened. He was barely 20, a child really, still learning the business. And you put a bullet in his head because he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. He was running guns through my territory. Guns that ended up killing civilians in a marketplace shooting. There were consequences. There were murders. Leone's voice rose. "He was my brother's only son. And you executed him without trial, without mercy, without any consideration for what he might have become. He made his choices. So did you. And tonight you face the consequences." 2 armed men emerged from the shadows, weapons trained on Vincenzo. He didn't move. "Here's what's going to happen," Leone said softly. "You're going to watch me hurt her. Nothing permanent. I'm not a complete monster, but enough to make a point. And then you're going to sign over certain assets, distribution networks, territory, the usual demands. And if I refuse, then I kill her in front of you, and then I kill you. and then I carve up your empire while everyone whispers about how the great Malaspina boss died begging for a woman who had already left him. The words were designed to wound. They succeeded. But Vincenzo had spent 3 weeks preparing for this moment. Not specifically this scenario, but the emotional reality that underpinned it. He had failed Serafina in every way that mattered. He had put his pride, his business, his image ahead of her needs. And he had watched her walk away because of it. If he had learned anything from that devastating loss, it was this: some things were worth dying for, and some things were worth killing for. He met Leon's eyes. "You made one mistake," he said quietly. "Oh? Enlighten me." "You assumed I was here alone." The first explosion came from the east entrance. Then the west. Then the loading dock. Chaos erupted across the factory floor as Vincenzo's men, who had not, in fact, remained at the perimeter, breached multiple entry points simultaneously. The element of surprise overwhelmed Leon's guards, and the darkness that had seemed so threatening moments ago became an ally as trained operatives moved through shadows with lethal efficiency. Leon cursed and grabbed Serafina, pressing a gun to her temple. "Don't move. You'll die with her blood on your hands and nothing to show for it." Vincenzo cut him off. "Your men are already falling. Your exit points are compromised. In approximately 2 minutes, this will be over one way or another. You think I won't do it? I think you came here for revenge, not suicide. Killing her gets you nothing except a painful death." Vincenzo took a slow step forward. "Let her go. Face me like a man. And this ends with only one of us bleeding." The offer hung in the smoky air. Around them, the sounds of combat were already fading, victory coming swiftly to those who had prepared for it. Leon's cold green eyes calculated odds that had turned catastrophically against him. Then, with a snarl of frustration, he shoved Serafina forward and raised his weapon toward Vincenzo instead. The gunshot echoed across the factory floor. But it didn't come from Leon. The rival boss crumpled, a red bloom spreading across his chest. Behind him, visible through the dissipating smoke, Matteo lowered his weapon with a steady hand. "You're welcome," he said dryly. Vincenzo was already moving, not toward the fallen enemy, but toward the woman who had been his wife. Serafina. He dropped to his knees beside her, his tattooed hands reaching for the ropes that bound her wrists. "Are you hurt?" "Did he?" "I'm fine." Her voice shook despite the words. "I'm fine. The ropes fell away. She collapsed against him, and for the first time in months, he held her without reservation. Not because she was his property, not because he was claiming ownership, but because she needed comfort and he needed to provide it. "I'm sorry," he whispered into her hair. "I'm so sorry. For everything. For all of it. Not now." Her fingers gripped his suit jacket like a lifeline. "Later. We can fight later. Right now I just need." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. He held her tighter. And amid the chaos of victory and the lingering scent of gunpowder, something shifted between them. Not forgiveness, that would take longer. Not trust, that would take longer still. But possibility. The fragile, precious possibility that maybe, just maybe, destruction wasn't the end of their story. Maybe it was the beginning. The next hours blurred together in a haze of medical attention, security protocols, and questions that seemed endless. Leon Gherardi was dead. His operation would scatter without his leadership. The immediate threat had been neutralized. But the larger threat, the traitors within Vincenzo's own organization who had made the kidnapping possible, remained. Dawn was breaking over the Amalfi coast by the time they returned to the Bellandi estate. Serafina had been checked by doctors, treated for minor injuries, and declared physically unharmed. Emotionally was a different matter. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at hands that hadn't stopped trembling since the factory. Vincenzo stood in the doorway, uncertain whether his presence was comfort or intrusion. "You shouldn't have come alone," she said finally. "I wasn't alone. Not really. But he didn't know that. Neither did I." She looked up at him, and her hazel eyes held something he'd never seen before. "When I heard your voice in that factory, I thought I was about to watch you die. Would that have mattered? The question emerged before he could stop it. Serafina stared at him. Would it have mattered? She repeated. Vincenzo, I spent 8 years loving you despite everything you did to push me away. I stayed through the missed dinners and the canceled plans and the nights you made me feel invisible. I stayed because somewhere underneath all that armor, I believed the man I married still existed. And now I saw him. Her voice cracked. In that factory. When you walked into a trap because you couldn't leave me there. When you held me after. When you apologized without trying to minimize or excuse. She stood, and despite everything, she moved toward him. I can't forgive you yet, she said softly. There's too much damage. Too many wounds that haven't healed. But tonight you showed me something I've needed to see for a very long time. What? That you can put someone else first. That I can matter more than your pride. Her hand touched his face. The first willing touch she'd given him since the divorce. It's not enough. It's only a beginning. But it's real. Vincenzo felt something crack open in his chest. All the defenses he'd built over decades. All the walls that had kept him isolated and invulnerable. All the armor that had cost him the woman he loved. Gone. Stripped away by her touch. What do we do now? He asked. Now. She exhaled slowly. Now you go deal with the traitors in your organization. I stay here and try to process what happened. And when everything is stable, when the immediate crisis is over, we talk. We talk. She agreed. Really talk. About everything. The past. The future. Whether there's any chance of... She didn't finish. She didn't need to. Vincenzo took her hand, gently, without demand. I'll be back, he said. As soon as I can. And Serafina? Yes. Whatever happens after tonight, I need you to know that I understand now. What I did wrong. Why you left. The difference between possession and partnership. His voice roughened. I'm not promising I'll never fail you again. I'm human. I'll make mistakes. But I'm promising that I'll never stop trying to be better. Not for you because that's the wrong motivation, but for myself. Because you deserve someone who fights for growth instead of control. She searched his face. Found truth. Then go, she said quietly. Handle what needs handling. And come back when you're ready to show me what change looks like. He nodded. He released her hand. He walked away. But at the door he paused. Serafina? Yes. I love you, he said simply. I've always loved you. I just forgot how to show it. Then he was gone. And Serafina was left standing in the morning light, her heart fracturing and healing simultaneously, wondering if the man who had just walked out of her life might finally be someone worth letting back in. 60 hours later, the betrayal was exposed in full. 3 men within Vincenzo's organization had been feeding information to Leone Gherardi for almost a year. Their motivation was simple. They believed Vincenzo's increasing personal distraction had made him vulnerable, and they wanted to back the winning side. They had miscalculated. The interrogations took place in a secure facility outside Milan. Vincenzo didn't participate directly. He didn't trust himself to remain rational. But he watched through one-way glass as Matteo extracted every piece of information. The scope of the betrayal was staggering. Not just surveillance on Serafina, not just tactical positioning for Gherardi's attacks, but something else. Something that made Vincenzo's blood turn to ice. They were watching her before the divorce, Matteo reported afterward. For months, Gherardi knew your marriage was failing before you signed the papers. He'd already identified her as a leverage point. How did they know our marriage was failing? Matteo hesitated. Because they were watching you too. Both of you. The canceled dinners. The separate bedrooms. The night she collapsed at the charity event and you barely looked up from your phone. The words landed like physical blows. They saw me failing her, Vincenzo said slowly, and they reported it to an enemy who used it against us. Yes, my weakness didn't just hurt my marriage. It endangered her life. Also, yes, Vincenzo stood at the window of his study, watching Milan's skyline glitter beneath an evening sky. the cathedral tattoo on his left forearm. Family, loyalty, redemption, seemed to pulse with accusation. "What happens now?" Matteo asked. "We rebuild, carefully. Every member of the organization vetted. Every loyalty tested." Vincenzo turned. "And when it's done, when I can be certain that she'll never be endangered by my world again, I go back to Amalfi. To win her back? To try." His voice softened. "Whether I succeed, that's up to her. What if she says no?" It was the question that had haunted him since he'd walked out of her room at dawn. "Then I accept it," he said finally. "I let her go. I give her the freedom she deserves." His jaw tightened. "But I won't let my last memory of her be the courthouse. I won't let our story end with signed papers and public humiliation. Whatever happens, I owe her a better ending than that." Matteo studied his friend. "You've changed," he said quietly. "I'm trying to." "No, you have changed. I've known you for 30 years, Vincenzo. I've watched you face down enemies who would make most men weep. But I've never seen you face yourself like this. Because I never had to before." Vincenzo reached for his jacket. "When you're strong enough to force the world to bend, you never learn to adapt. You never need to grow. You just demand. And now I've met the one thing my strength can't conquer." His voice cracked slightly. "Her will, her dignity, her right to choose who she spends her life with, even if that choice isn't me." 10 days passed. The organization stabilized. The traitors were dealt with. The remaining members, chastened by how close everything had come to collapse, renewed their loyalty with genuine commitment. Vincenzo prepared to return to Amalfi. The night before his departure, he sat alone in the study he had destroyed weeks earlier. It had been repaired now, new desk, new shelving, new everything. But something was different. Among the replacement items, he had added photographs. His wedding day, their first anniversary, a trip to Venice she'd loved and he'd barely participated in because of constant phone calls. Evidence of a life he'd been too blind to appreciate. Evidence of what he was fighting to deserve again. His phone buzzed. A message from Serafina. "I know you're coming tomorrow. Before you arrive, there's something you should know. Something I've discovered that changes everything we thought we understood about our marriage." His heart stopped. "What is it?" "Not by phone. In person. Come to the estate at sunset. Come alone." He stared at the message. What had she discovered? What could possibly change what they'd thought they understood? His mind raced through possibilities, none of them comforting. But one thing was certain. Tomorrow would determine everything. Tomorrow he would face whatever truth she had uncovered. And tomorrow their story would either end, or finally begin again. The drive to Amalfi felt longer than any journey Vincenzo had ever taken. Every kilometer brought him closer to a truth he didn't understand. A revelation that Serafina had promised would change everything. His mind cycled through possibilities, each one more troubling than the last. Had she discovered something about his business? About his enemies? About the years of marriage he had systematically destroyed? The sunset painted the Italian countryside in shades of blood and gold as his car wound through coastal roads that clung to cliffs like desperate prayers. The Mediterranean spread endlessly to his left, its surface catching the dying light like scattered diamonds. Beautiful, indifferent, eternal. He arrived at the Bellandi estate as the last rays of sunlight touched the ancient olive trees that lined the approach. The iron gates opened without resistance this time. He had been expected. The villa itself seemed to glow from within, warm light spilling through windows that had witnessed generations of love and loss. Somewhere inside, Serafina waited with answers he wasn't sure he wanted. But he had promised her honesty, and honesty required facing uncomfortable truths. He found her in the library. The room occupied the estate's eastern wing, its walls lined with leather-bound volumes that stretched toward vaulted ceilings. A fire crackled in the massive stone hearth despite the mild evening, casting dancing shadows across furniture that had been old when Serafina's grandparents were young. She stood by the window, silhouetted against the dying light, her dark hair loose around her shoulders. The simple white dress she wore seemed almost bridal in the firelight, a coincidence that made his chest ache. "You came," she said without turning. "You asked me to. I asked you to come alone. I did." She turned then, and he saw that she had been crying. Not recently, her eyes were clear, her composure intact. But the evidence remained in the slight puffiness around her lids, the rawness that spoke of hours spent wrestling with something painful. "What did you discover?" he asked quietly. Instead of answering, she moved to a small table near the fire where a wooden box sat waiting. It was old, perhaps a century or more, with brass hinges tarnished by time and a lock that had long since ceased to function. "My grandmother gave me this 2 days ago," Serafina said. "It belonged to my mother. She died when I was 12, as you know. But there were things she left behind that Nana kept hidden. Things she thought I wasn't ready to see. And now she believes I need to understand." Serafina opened the box. "Before I make any decisions about my future." Inside, Vincenzo could see papers, letters by the look of them, and photographs. The yellowed edges spoke of decades, of secrets preserved through years of silence. "What is this?" "My mother's correspondence. With your father." The words landed like a physical blow. Vincenzo felt the room tilt slightly beneath his feet. "My father. Marco Malaspina." "Yes." Serafina extracted a photograph and held it toward the firelight. "This was taken in 1985, 3 years before I was born. 2 years before you were born." The image showed 2 young people on what appeared to be this very estate. A man with dark hair and steel-gray eyes that Vincenzo recognized from his own mirror, and a woman whose resemblance to Serafina was unmistakable. His father, her mother, together. They were in love, Serafina continued quietly. For almost 2 years, according to these letters. A secret relationship that both families would have forbidden. The Malaspinas and the Bellandis had been rivals for generations. "Did you know that?" "I knew there was history." "History?" She almost laughed. "That's one way to describe 3 generations of blood feuds and territorial disputes. By the time your father and my mother met, the families had achieved an uneasy peace. But marriage between them would have been unthinkable." "What happened?" "Your grandfather discovered the affair, threatened to disown Marco entirely if he didn't end it. And your father." She pulled another letter from the box. "Your father chose the family, the power, the legacy." Vincenzo's mind raced. His father, the cold, distant patriarch who had ruled the Malaspina Empire with iron control, had once loved someone enough to risk everything? 3 months after Marco ended the relationship, Serafina continued, my mother married my father, a good man, a gentle man, someone who loved her even though he knew her heart belonged elsewhere. Her voice caught. They were happy, I think, eventually, but she never forgot Marco. These letters, the ones she wrote but never sent, they continued for years, decades. Why are you telling me this? Because of what I found at the bottom of the box. She reached into the wooden container and withdrew a single envelope, newer than the others, the paper crisp, the handwriting shakier. This is dated 3 years ago, she said, written by my mother, and delivered to your father shortly before his death. Vincenzo took the envelope with hands that weren't entirely steady. The letter inside was brief, perhaps 200 words, but its contents shattered everything he thought he knew about his marriage. Marco, I am dying. The doctors say months, perhaps weeks. But before I go, I need you to know something I should have told you decades ago. When you chose the family over our love, I was carrying your child. Serafina is your daughter. I know this will shock you. I know you may not believe it, but I have enclosed documents that will confirm my words. Medical records, dates, everything you need to verify what I am telling you. I am not seeking anything from you. It is far too late for that. But Serafina deserves to know her true heritage. When the time is right, I hope you will find a way to tell her. I loved you until my last breath. Isabella. The letter fell from Vincenzo's nerveless fingers. You're my sister, he breathed. No. He looked up, confusion and horror warring across his features. The letter is a lie, Serafina said quietly. Or rather, it was a lie my mother believed. I had the same reaction you just did. I spent 2 days in agony, believing that our entire marriage had been, that we had. She shuddered. But then I demanded a DNA test. My grandmother had preserved samples, hair from my mother's brush, other artifacts. I also obtained records from your family's medical files through channels I won't discuss. And I am not Marco Malaspina's biological daughter. Relief flooded her voice even as she said the words. The timing my mother remembered was wrong. I was conceived after she married my father, the medical records are clear. But she went to her grave believing otherwise. And your father died believing he had a daughter he never acknowledged. Yes. Vincenzo sank into the nearest chair, his legs no longer willing to support him. Why would she believe? Because love makes us remember things incorrectly. Because grief distorts time. Because she wanted, perhaps, to believe that something of their love had survived. Serafina moved to sit across from him. But there's more to this story. Something that explains things I could never understand about our marriage. What do you mean? When I investigated your father's reaction to my mother's letter, I discovered something disturbing. She leaned forward. He received it 2 weeks before our wedding. 2 weeks, Vincenzo. And according to his private journals, which Matteo helped me access, he spent those 2 weeks desperately trying to confirm or deny her claims. He knew. Before we married, he knew she had written. He knew she believed you might be marrying your half-sister. And he never told you. The implications crashed through Vincenzo's mind like waves against stone. That's why he was so strange before the ceremony, he realized. I thought he was ill. He seemed haunted, distant. He barely spoke at the reception. Because he hadn't finished his investigation. The medical records that would have proven the timing wrong weren't accessible until after the wedding. By then, Serafina's voice hardened. By then, he decided the matter was closed. The letter was proven false. And there was no need to trouble anyone with what he privately called a dead woman's confusion. He let me marry you without telling me any of this. Yes. And he never told you either. No. He died 3 months after our wedding. The secret went with him, or so he believed. But he kept copies of everything. Insurance, perhaps. Or guilt. Her hands clenched in her lap. My grandmother found the documents among items returned after his death. She hid them because she wasn't sure what they meant or whether revealing them would cause more harm than good. Vincenzo stood abruptly, moving to the window where Serafina had been standing when he arrived. The last light had faded now, leaving only stars and the distant glow of coastal villages. This explains nothing about why our marriage failed, he said finally. I didn't know any of this. Neither did you. No, but it explains something else. Serafina rose and moved to stand beside him. Your father's journals continue past the wedding. He writes about watching us with a particular intensity. He notes every argument we had, every moment of tension, every sign that the marriage might be struggling. Why would he care? Because he was terrified. Part of him never fully accepted that the DNA evidence was conclusive. Part of him lived in fear that the truth would eventually emerge and destroy everything. That's insane. That's guilt, she corrected quietly. The guilt of a man who gave up the love of his life for power and position, and then watched his son make the same choice. The parallel struck Vincenzo like a blade. His father, cold, controlling, emotionally absent, had once chosen family legacy over love. And Vincenzo, without knowing any of this history, had followed the exact same pattern. Did he try to influence our marriage? Vincenzo asked slowly. The demands that kept me away so often. The emergencies that always seemed to arise at the worst moments. The pressure to prove myself worthy of the family name. I don't know for certain, but his journals suggest he believed keeping you busy, keeping you focused on business rather than intimacy, would prevent you from ever getting close enough to me to discover family secrets that didn't actually exist. Serafina touched his arm. Your father spent his final years manipulating you based on a fear that was never real. And I let him. You didn't know. I should have questioned. I should have pushed back against the endless demands. I should have. His voice broke. I should have chosen you. The silence stretched between them, heavy with revelations and regret. Finally, Serafina spoke again. I didn't tell you this to give you an excuse, she said carefully. Your choices were still your choices. Your father's manipulation doesn't absolve you of the nights you ignored me, the events you missed, the ways you made me feel invisible. I know, but it does provide context. It helps me understand that you weren't simply indifferent. You were shaped by a man who was deliberately trying to prevent closeness, who trained you to believe that emotional distance was strength. And now we have the truth. She turned to face him fully, her hazel eyes searching his. Now we know that your father's fears were baseless, that there are no dark secrets lurking in our past, and that whatever happens next will be our choice. Not his, not our family's, ours. Vincenzo absorbed her words. For weeks, he had been preparing to fight for a second chance, to prove through actions that he had changed, that he could be the partner she deserved. He had expected the battle to be against her skepticism, her justified anger, her reluctance to trust again. He hadn't expected this, a revelation that reframed their entire history, a truth that made his failures both more understandable and more tragic. What do you want to happen now? He asked quietly. Serafina didn't answer immediately. Instead, she moved to the fireplace, watching the flames dance against the ancient stone. When I was tied to that chair in the factory, she said finally, waiting for either rescue or death, I had a lot of time to think about our marriage, about the divorce, about what I actually wanted from my life. And I realized that I had been defining myself by what you weren't giving me. For 8 years, my identity became the neglected wife, the woman who deserved better but wasn't receiving it. Even when I finally left, I was still letting you determine who I was. I don't understand. I mean, that walking away wasn't about finding myself. It was about punishing you, about making a statement, about forcing you to face consequences. She turned to look at him. But revenge isn't the same as healing. And independence that's defined by rejection isn't really independence at all. Vincenzo felt something shift in his chest, a door opening that he hadn't known existed. These past weeks, Serafina continued, I've been doing something different. I've been asking myself who I am without you. Not who I am in opposition to you, but who I am completely separate from our relationship. And who are you? A small smile touched her lips. I'm a woman who loves to paint but stopped because you never noticed when I did. I'm someone who dreamed of opening a children's art foundation but gave up because you made me feel like my ambitions were distractions from my role as your wife. I'm a person who has always believed in second chances, not because I'm naive, but because I've seen how much people can change when they choose to. She moved closer. I'm also someone who never stopped loving you, even when you made it impossible to like you, even when every rational part of my brain screamed that I should move on. Serafina, let me finish. Her voice was gentle but firm. Love isn't enough. We've proven that. 8 years of love couldn't sustain a marriage built on inequality and emotional neglect. But love combined with real change, with mutual respect and genuine partnership, that might be different. What are you saying? I'm saying I don't want to divorce you. The words struck him speechless. The papers were signed, she continued, but they haven't been finalized. We have until the end of the month to withdraw them. And she took a breath. I want to try again. Not pick up where we left off. That relationship was broken beyond repair. But build something new, something healthy, something that honors both of us. You would take me back? I would give us another chance. With conditions. Anything. Don't say that until you hear them. Her eyes held his steadily. First, couples therapy. Not negotiable. We have patterns that need professional help to unravel. Agreed. Second, I pursue my own work. The art foundation I mentioned. You support it without attempting to control it or absorb it into your business interests. Of course. Third, and this is the hardest one, You begin the process of transitioning out of the illegal aspects of your business. I'm not naive enough to believe it can happen overnight, but I need to know it's moving in that direction. I can't raise children wondering if their father will come home in a body bag. The mention of children made his heart stutter. Children. Eventually. If we prove we can be good partners to each other first. A vulnerability crept into her expression. Is that something you would want? Vincenzo thought of the little girl in the hallway, Alessandro's daughter, asking if he was a monster or a protector. He thought of all the ways his own father had failed him, all the patterns he had unconsciously inherited. And he thought of who he could become, who he was choosing to become. Yes, he said hoarsely. God, yes, but only if I can be the father they deserve. Only if I've proven that I won't repeat my father's mistakes. Then we agree on that too. The fire crackled between them, filling silence that no longer felt empty. There's one more condition, Serafina said quietly. Name it. Kiss me. Right now. Not because you own me. Not because you're claiming me. But because you want to and I want you to, and for the first time in years we're choosing each other freely. Vincenzo closed the distance between them. His hands, tattooed and scarred and marked by a life of violence, cupped her face with impossible gentleness. The Roman lion on his forearm caught the firelight as he touched her. The cathedral, the words across his knuckles. Honor y verit, honor and truth. He was finally learning what they meant. I love you, he whispered against her lips. Not as a possession, not as a symbol, as a partner, as my equal, as the woman who had every right to leave and is choosing, against all odds, to stay. I love you too, she breathed. The man you're becoming, the man I always believed you could be. When their lips met, it was different from every kiss they had shared before. Not passionate in the desperate, claiming way of their early relationship. Not cold and perfunctory like the empty gestures of their later years. This was a promise, a beginning, a covenant between two people who had broken each other and were choosing, consciously, to heal together. The weeks that followed were not easy. Rebuilding trust, Vincenzo learned, was not a single moment of grand redemption but rather an endless series of small choices. It was remembering to call when he would be late. It was putting down his phone during dinner. It was asking about her day and actually listening to the answer. It was showing up. Again and again and again. The couple's therapy sessions were brutal at first. Dr. Eliana Costa, a silver-haired psychologist who had spent 30 years helping powerful people confront their emotional limitations, had no patience for deflection or excuse. You speak of love, she said during their third session, but your behavior has consistently communicated something else. What message were you actually sending your wife? That she wasn't a priority, Vincenzo admitted. Be more specific. He looked at Serafina, who sat beside him on the therapist's couch, her hands folded in her lap with the same quiet composure she had shown at the courthouse. That she was convenient, he continued painfully. That she would always be there, regardless of how I treated her. That her needs were secondary to everything else in my life. And Serafina? How did receiving that message affect you? She was quiet for a long moment. I started to believe it, she said finally. That I was secondary. That wanting more was unreasonable. I shrank myself to fit into the space he was willing to give me, and when that space kept getting smaller, I shrank more. Until there was nothing left. Until I realized I had disappeared into his life completely, and the woman I had been before our marriage was gone. Her voice cracked. The hospital stay was a wake-up call. My body was literally failing because I had given so much of myself that there was nothing left. Vincenzo reached for her hand. She let him take it. This is where we start, Dr. Costa said. Not with apologies or promises, but with understanding. You both need to see clearly what happened before you can build something different. And can we? Vincenzo asked. Build something different? That depends entirely on you, on whether you're willing to do the work, not just in this room but every day in every interaction. Transformation is not an event. It's a practice. While they worked on their relationship, Vincenzo also worked on his empire. The process of transitioning away from illegal operations was not something that could happen quickly. Generations of infrastructure, relationships, and economic dependencies could not be unwound overnight. But he began making moves that shifted the Malaspina interests toward legitimate enterprises. Real estate development, sustainable agriculture, technology investments. His lieutenants were skeptical at first. "You're talking about walking away from hundreds of millions in annual revenue," Romano pointed out during one planning session. "The families who depend on that income, they won't understand." "Then help them understand." Vincenzo's voice brooked no argument. "The world is changing. The authorities are more sophisticated. The risks are greater. And He paused. "I have reasons now to want a different kind of legacy. The Signora, my wife, yes, and the children we hope to have. I won't build them an empire of blood. The transition would take years." He knew that, but every step in the right direction mattered, not just for Serafina, but for his own transformation into someone worthy of the second chance he had been given. 3 months after the revelation in the library, Vincenzo took Serafina to Palermo. The city had been significant in their early relationship, the place where they had first met, at a charity gala hosted by mutual acquaintances who had no idea they were facilitating a connection between rival families. "I was so nervous that night," Serafina admitted as they walked through the historic district, her arm linked through his. "I knew who you were. Everyone knew who you were. And you were staring at me from across the room like you were the most beautiful woman I had ever seen, like you were deciding whether to pursue me or have me investigated." He laughed. A real laugh, the kind that had been rare in their marriage and was becoming more frequent in their renewal. "Probably both," he admitted. "I couldn't figure out why a Bellandi would be at an event full of Malaspina associates. I thought you might be a spy. And when you discovered I was just a woman who loved art and had been invited by a friend, I was disappointed. I was hoping for something dramatic that would justify my fascination." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "Instead, I found something better. A person who saw through every mask I wore and liked me anyway." "I thought I did," she said quietly. "But I realize now that I was seeing who I wanted you to be, not who you actually were. That's part of what went wrong. I fell in love with potential instead of reality. And now I'm trying to love the real you, flaws and growth and everything in between." She reached up to touch his face. "It's harder, but it feels more honest." They had dinner that night at a small restaurant overlooking the harbor, the same establishment where they had shared their first meal together, 9 years ago, when he had been charming and she had been hopeful and neither of them had understood the challenges that awaited. "I've been thinking about what you said," Vincenzo mentioned over dessert. "About pursuing your art foundation." "Yes, I have a proposal." He reached into his jacket and produced a folder of documents. "There's a property outside Florence, an old villa that's been vacant for years. I've been holding it as an investment, but it occurs to me that it would make an ideal location for a residential art program." Serafina took the folder, her eyes widening as she reviewed the photographs and details. "Vincenzo, this is exactly what I envisioned. Studios, living quarters for young artists, gardens for inspiration. It's yours. No strings attached. I've already had the lawyer's draft papers that put it entirely in your name. I can't accept. You can." He reached across the table to cover her hand with his. "Not as a gift designed to buy your affection. As a recognition that your dreams matter. That the life you build outside of our marriage is as important as the life we build together." She stared at him. "Who are you?" she whispered. "Someone trying to become worthy of you." His thumb traced circles on her hand. "I know I have years of behavior to overcome. I know that gestures like this could be seen as another form of control. But I'm asking you to believe that my motivations have changed." "Have they?" "Yes." His voice was steady. "I want you to be happy. Not happy with me, though I hope for that too, but happy in your own right. Fulfilled. Pursuing work that matters to you." growing in ways that have nothing to do with our relationship. Serafina looked at the documents again, then at the man who had given them to her. I'll accept, she said slowly, on one condition. Name it. You visit regularly, not to check on the property, not to oversee operations, but to see the art, to engage with the young people we're helping, to be part of something that creates instead of destroys. The request cut deeper than she probably intended. His entire life had been about power, taking it, maintaining it, wielding it against enemies real and imagined. The idea of being part of something that simply created, that nurtured, that built up rather than tore down. It was foreign territory. It was exactly what he needed. Agreed, he said hoarsely. She smiled. The same smile he had fallen in love with 9 years ago, but warmer now, more knowing, tinged with hard-won wisdom. Then let's build something beautiful, she said. The confrontation Vincenzo had been dreading came 4 months after they had withdrawn the divorce papers. He had known it would happen eventually. His organization, even in its transitioning state, required occasional demonstrations of strength. Challenges arose from those who perceived the shift toward legitimacy as weakness. Enzo Ferrara was the latest challenger. 42 years old, hungry, ambitious. Exactly the kind of man Vincenzo had once been. Ferrara controlled drug distribution networks across southern Italy and had been expanding aggressively into territories that had traditionally belonged to the Malaspinas. The meeting took place on neutral ground, a vineyard in Tuscany owned by a mutual associate who had brokered countless negotiations between rival families. I hear you're going soft, Ferrara said as they walked among the grapevines, their bodyguards maintaining careful distance. Therapy, art foundations, a wife you actually seem to care about. Your point. My point is that the Vincenzo Malaspina I grew up hearing about would have crushed me 6 months ago for the moves I've been making. Instead, you've been negotiating, discussing, making deals. Would you prefer I crush you now? The question was asked mildly, but something shifted in Ferrara's expression. For all his ambition, he was not a fool, and the man standing beside him, despite his recent changes, remained one of the most dangerous people in Italy. I would prefer clarity, Ferrara said carefully. Are you still the man everyone fears? Or have you become something different? Vincenzo stopped walking. The tattoos on his forearms caught the Tuscan sunlight as he rolled his sleeves. The Roman lion, the cathedral, all the symbols of power and protection that had defined his life. Let me be clear, he said quietly. I am pursuing legitimacy not because I am weak, but because I choose a different path. My capacity for violence remains unchanged. My willingness to protect what I love remains absolute. The only thing that has shifted is my understanding of what truly deserves protection. Meaning that I will not start wars over territory or pride or reputation. But if you threaten my family, if you move against my wife or the people I love, you will discover that the man everyone fears is still very much alive. Ferrara studied him. And what about the business disputes? The territories I've taken? Keep them. I'm consolidating, not expanding. What I hold securely. What I've released deliberately. Vincenzo resumed walking. But understand this, my restraint is a choice, not a limitation. The moment it becomes necessary to remind you of that distinction. He let the sentence hang unfinished. Ferrara was silent for a long moment. You really have changed, he said finally. I didn't believe it until now. Believe what you want. Just don't mistake my evolution for weakness. They parted ways that afternoon with something resembling mutual respect. Not friendship, never friendship, but an understanding between predators who had agreed not to hunt in each other's territories. When Vincenzo returned home that evening, Serafina was waiting in the garden. She looked up from the book she was reading, and something in his expression must have revealed the weight of the day. Difficult meeting? She asked. The kind that was necessary. He settled beside her on the stone bench, the same bench where they had first discussed rebuilding their marriage. I had to explain to someone that changing doesn't mean becoming weak. Did he understand? Eventually. though it required reminding him what I'm still capable of. She was quiet for a moment. Does that bother you? That part of your power still comes from fear. It was the kind of question she wouldn't have asked before. Too direct, too challenging. But their new relationship operated on different principles. Yes, he admitted. And no, I can't pretend the past doesn't exist, or that the skills I developed over 40 years have suddenly disappeared. But I can choose when to use them. And why? What guided your choices today? You did. He took her hand. Every decision I made in that meeting was filtered through a simple question. What would allow me to come home to you with a clear conscience? What would protect our future without compromising who I'm trying to become? Her eyes softened. That's new. It is. And it's not easy. The old patterns are still there, whispering that power requires cruelty, that mercy is weakness, that the moment I show vulnerability, someone will exploit it. He exhaled. But I keep choosing differently, again and again, because the alternative is losing everything that actually matters. She leaned against his shoulder. I'm proud of you, she said quietly. I know that probably sounds condescending. It doesn't. But I mean it. The man you're becoming is someone I can respect. Not just love, but respect. And for me, that's everything. They sat in comfortable silence as twilight painted the garden in shades of purple and gold. Eventually, she spoke again. My doctor called today. Something in her voice made his heart accelerate. Is everything all right? Better than all right. She lifted her head to meet his eyes. I'm pregnant. The world stopped, then started again, transformed. Pregnant, he repeated. About 8 weeks. Early still. Too early to be certain everything will be fine. But tears were streaming down her face now. Happy tears, hopeful tears. I thought you should know. Vincenzo couldn't speak. He had built empires. He had faced death more times than he could count. He had navigated political complexities that would have destroyed lesser men. None of it had prepared him for this moment. A child, he finally managed. We're having a child. We are. I'm going to be a father. You are. He pulled her into his arms, holding her with a tenderness that felt almost painful. I'll be better, he whispered into her hair. I'll be everything our child needs. I'll be present and patient and, you already are. She pulled back to look at him, her hazel eyes luminous with emotion. The work you've done these past months, the therapy, the changes, the daily choice to show up differently, that's who our child's father will be. Not the man you were before. The man you're becoming now. For the first time in his adult life, Vincenzo Malaspina wept. Not from grief or rage or frustration. From overwhelming, terrifying, world-altering joy. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Each week brought new developments. Ultrasounds that revealed a heartbeat strong and steady. Appointments where doctors confirmed that mother and baby were thriving. Moments of wonder that repeatedly broke through Vincenzo's lifetime of emotional armor. He attended every appointment. Every one. Nothing was more important. You realize, Matteo observed one afternoon, watching his boss clear his schedule yet again for a medical visit, that the organization notices when you prioritize a doctor's appointment over a strategic meeting. Let them notice. Some might see it as what? Evidence that I care about my wife and child? That I have learned to value people over power. Vincenzo shrugged into his jacket. If that's weakness, I'll be weak. Matteo shook his head, but there was respect in his eyes. You've changed, he said. Really changed. Not just the surface adjustments I expected, but something fundamental. Serafina changed me. And this child. Vincenzo touched his chest, where the photograph from his wedding day still rested in his pocket. A talisman he had carried since the day of the divorce. This child is changing me even more. I look at the future differently now. What I want to build. What I want to leave behind. And what do you want to leave behind? It was a question Vincenzo had been asking himself increasingly. Something better than what I inherited, he said finally. My father left me power and fear and enough emotional damage to nearly destroy my marriage. I want to leave possibility. a foundation that creates rather than destroys, a family that knows how to love, a legacy that doesn't require bloodshed to maintain. That's quite a shift. It's a necessary one. He moved toward the door. The old ways are dying, Matteo. Not just for me, for everyone in our world. The families that survive the next generation will be the ones that learn to adapt, to legitimize, to build wealth through creation rather than extraction. And the families that don't adapt will disappear, one way or another. Vincenzo paused at the threshold. I don't intend to be among them, and more importantly, I don't intend for my child to inherit a war. 8 months after they had reconciled, Serafina's labor began. It happened at night, of course. These things always seem to happen at night. One moment they were sleeping peacefully, her body curved against his hand resting on the swell of her belly where their child grew. The next moment, she was gripping his arm with surprising strength. Vincenzo, what is it? It's time. The drive to the hospital was a blur of adrenaline and reassurance. Serafina was calm, far calmer than he felt, breathing through contractions with the focused determination that had always been one of her greatest strengths. You're panicking, she observed during a pause between contractions. I am not panicking. You've run 3 red lights and your knuckles are white. That's not panic. That's efficient driving. She laughed, and even in the midst of everything, the sound settled something in his chest. They were in this together. Whatever happened, they would face it together. The labor lasted 14 hours. Vincenzo remained at her side through every moment, holding her hand, supporting her through contractions, whispering encouragement when her strength flagged. He had never felt more useless in his life. All his power, all his influence, and he could do nothing to ease her pain. But he could be present. He could show up, and that, he was learning, was sometimes enough. At 7:23 in the morning, their daughter entered the world. She was perfect. Dark hair, gray eyes that would probably lighten over time but for now were echoes of his own. Tiny fingers that wrapped around his index finger with a grip that seemed to promise she would never let go. She's beautiful, Serafina breathed, exhausted and radiant. She's you, Vincenzo managed through a throat tight with emotion. She's the best of you. She's both of us. Serafina looked up at him, her hazel eyes holding everything they had survived and everything they were building. The best of both of us. They named her Isabella, after Serafina's mother, the woman whose letter had nearly destroyed them and whose memory now blessed them instead. Do you think she would have approved? Serafina asked later, when they were alone with their daughter. My mother? Of us? Vincenzo considered the question. I think she would have recognized something of herself in what we went through, he said slowly. The love, the pain, the choices that seemed impossible at the time. And I think... He touched his daughter's face gently. I think she would have been proud of how we found our way back to each other. Even though it took so long, some journeys require the long way around. Some lessons can only be learned through suffering. He met Serafina's eyes. I wouldn't wish our path on anyone, but I also wouldn't trade where it's brought us. 1 year later, they stood together in the olive grove where Vincenzo had first realized what he had lost. The Bellandi estate's ancient trees stretched around them, gnarled branches reaching toward a cloudless summer sky. Family and friends had gathered, close family only, the inner circle that understood what this moment truly meant. Luciana Bellandi sat in the front row, Isabella cradled in her arms, watching her granddaughter and the man who had almost destroyed her prepare to exchange new vows. We could have had a bigger ceremony, Matteo had pointed out during the planning. People would expect it. The Malaspina boss renewing his vows, that's an event. This isn't about what people expect, Vincenzo had replied. This is about what matters. Now, standing beneath the olive trees with Serafina's hands in his, he understood why he had insisted on keeping this moment intimate. Some promises were too sacred for spectacle. Some transformations could only be witnessed by those who understood their true cost. When we married the first time, Serafina said, her voice carrying clearly through the grove, I believed I knew what I was choosing. powerful man, a complicated life, a love that would require sacrifice. But I didn't understand, not really, what that would mean. She paused, gathering herself. Today I understand. I've lived the reality of what our choices cost. I felt the pain of watching love fail despite wanting it desperately to succeed. And I've experienced the harder, slower work of rebuilding what was broken. Her eyes met his. I choose you today knowing exactly who you are. Not the man I hoped you would become, but the man who has shown me, through months of consistent action, that change is possible. That growth is real. That love can survive destruction and become something stronger. Vincenzo's turn came. He had prepared words, careful and considered, but they fled his mind as he looked at the woman who had saved him from himself. I spent 40 years believing strength meant control, he said finally. That love was about possession. That vulnerability was weakness to be exploited. Every lesson I learned, from my father, from my world, from my own choices, reinforced those beliefs. He reached up to touch her face, his tattooed fingers gentle against her cheek. You showed me I was wrong, not by arguing or demanding or trying to change me, but simply by leaving, by choosing yourself, by demonstrating that the strongest thing a person can do is walk away from love that hurts rather than staying out of obligation. His voice broke slightly. I am not the man you married 8 years ago. I am not even the man who signed our divorce papers, still foolish enough to believe you would come back because you belonged to me. I am someone new, someone who is still being formed, still learning, still failing and trying again. He took her hand and pressed it against his chest, over his heart. But I promise you this. I will never stop showing up. I will never stop doing the work. I will never take for granted the gift you have given me by choosing, freely, with full knowledge of my failures, to rebuild a life with me. The officiant, an old friend of Luciana's who had known the family for decades, spoke the traditional words. Rings were exchanged. Vows were sealed. But the moment that mattered most came after. When they turned to face their gathered family, Isabella reached toward her parents from Luciana's arms, her small voice forming the first word she had learned. Papa! Vincenzo crossed to take his daughter, holding her against his chest as Serafina joined them. The three of them stood together beneath the olive trees. Father, mother, child. A family forged through suffering and rebuilt through choice. I never thought I would have this, Vincenzo said quietly, for Serafina's ears alone. Neither did I. She leaned into him. But we do. We do. That evening, after the celebration had wound down and the guests had departed, Vincenzo walked alone through the olive grove. The moon had risen, casting silver light across the gnarled trees and the grounds where his daughter would grow up knowing she was loved. Somewhere behind him, in the villa, Serafina was putting Isabella to bed. A ritual he usually shared but had ceded tonight because he needed a moment to process everything. A year ago, he had stood on this same ground, desperate, terrified, facing the consequences of every failure he had accumulated over a decade of neglect. Today, he had renewed his vows to a woman who had every reason to never trust him again. Tomorrow, he would wake up beside her, help with their daughter, continue building the legitimate business enterprises that would define his legacy, and practice, again, the daily discipline of being a good partner and father. The work was never done. He understood that now. Love wasn't a destination reached through grand gestures. It was a practice maintained through small choices. Every day, every interaction, every moment when the old patterns whispered their seductive lies about power and control and dominion. Every time he chose differently, he became more himself. Not the man his father had shaped him to be. The man he was choosing to become. Footsteps behind him. He turned to find Serafina approaching, her white dress catching the moonlight, her hair loose around her shoulders. Isabella's asleep, she said. Already. She had a big day. All the attention exhausted her. Serafina moved to stand beside him, her hand finding his. What are you doing out here? Thinking. About. The past year. The years before that. Everything we survived to get here. He squeezed her hand. I keep expecting to wake up and find it was all a dream. That I'm still the man who signed those divorce papers, believing I could force you to come back through sheer force of will. You're not him anymore. I know, but sometimes I feel him. Underneath. The patterns, the assumptions, the instincts I developed over decades. He turned to face her. Does it bother you? Knowing that part of me still exists. Serafina considered the question. No, she said finally. Because I know something more important than whether that part exists. What? That you keep choosing differently anyway. That you feel those old impulses and you override them, consciously, deliberately, every single time. She touched his face. That's not weakness, Vincenzo. That's the greatest strength I've ever witnessed. He pulled her close, holding her beneath the ancient trees, surrounded by a silence that felt sacred. I love you, he said. I know. I will spend the rest of my life trying to deserve you. I know that too. She pulled back to meet his eyes. And I will spend the rest of my life being glad I gave you the chance. They walked back to the villa together, hand in hand, their daughter sleeping peacefully in the room where generations of Bellendi women had grown and loved and faced their own impossible choices. The story that had begun with signed divorce papers and a shattered courthouse window was not ending tonight. It was continuing, growing, becoming something neither of them could have imagined when they stood on opposite sides of that conference table, believing their love had finally reached its end. Some stories end with happily ever after. Theirs was something different. Theirs was happily because of the work, because of the choice made fresh each day to show up for each other, because of the understanding, hard-won, painfully earned, that love was not about possession. It was about becoming someone worthy of being chosen. Again and again and again. 10 years later, the art foundation that Serafina had dreamed of now occupied 3 locations across Italy, serving hundreds of young artists each year. The Florence Villa, Vincenzo's first gift of their renewed marriage, had become internationally renowned as a place where creative potential was nurtured into professional achievement. Serafina oversaw it all with the same quiet competence she brought to everything. And Vincenzo, true to his promise, visited regularly. Not to control or oversee, but to participate. To engage with the young people whose lives were being shaped by something constructive rather than destructive. To be part of creation rather than destruction. Isabella, now 10 years old, had inherited her mother's artistic talent and her father's intensity. She spent weekends at the foundation, learning to paint and sculpt and see the world through the lens of beauty rather than power. She also had 2 younger siblings, Marco, 7, named for the complicated legacy of Vincenzo's father, and Lucia, 4, named for the grandmother who had never stopped believing that redemption was possible. The Malaspina organization had completed its transition. Not overnight, not easily, but steadily, methodically, through years of strategic shifts and difficult decisions. The illegitimate operations had been dismantled or sold. The legitimate enterprises had grown to replace them, and then to exceed them. Vincenzo's empire was now built on construction and agriculture and technology. Industries that created jobs and contributed to communities rather than exploiting them. Some of his former associates had adapted. Some had not. Enzo Ferrara, the ambitious challenger from years ago, had eventually self-destructed, his aggression leading to conflict with law enforcement that his organization could not survive. Others had followed similar paths, consumed by the very violence they had wielded. Vincenzo had watched from the sidelines, no longer participant but observer, as the world he had once dominated transformed around him. He did not miss it. The old life had given him power without peace. The new life gave him both. On a warm evening in early autumn, Vincenzo sat on the terrace of their home. A villa they had purchased together, chosen together, decorated together. Watching the sun set over the Tuscan hills, Serafina joined him, 2 glasses of wine in hand. The children are doing homework, she reported. Well, Isabella is doing homework. Marco is pretending to do homework while actually building something with blocks. And Lucia is supervising everyone. So typical chaos. Typical, beautiful chaos. She handed him a glass and settled into the chair beside his. I love this time of day. When the chaos pauses. When we get to just be together, without any crisis demanding attention. He reached for her hand, a gesture that had become habit over the years, the constant physical connection that grounded him when the old patterns threatened to resurface. I was thinking earlier, he said, about the courthouse, the day we signed the divorce papers. What about it? I remember watching you walk out, seeing you embrace Alessandro, the kiss on his cheek. He shook his head. I was so convinced you had moved on, that you had found someone else, that everything we had built was being replaced before my eyes. And you shouted for all of Milan to hear that I was still yours. I did. Perhaps my least dignified moment. Perhaps. He smiled. Definitely my least dignified moment. What made you think of that? I was watching the sunset and remembering what I felt in that moment. The rage, the possessiveness, the absolute certainty that I had been betrayed. He turned to look at her. I didn't understand anything then. About love. About partnership. About what it meant to truly be with someone. And now I understand that the man who shouted those words needed to lose everything before he could learn to value anything. His thumb traced circles on her hand. You weren't still mine that day. You had never been mine at all. Not in the way I meant it. How did you mean it? As property. As conquest. As something I had claimed and therefore controlled. He shook his head. It took losing you to understand that love doesn't work that way. That partnership requires equality. That the only claim worth having is the one that's freely given every day. Serafina leaned against his shoulder. I think about that day too sometimes, she admitted. But what I remember is different. What do you remember? Looking up at that window and seeing your face. The pain beneath the anger. The desperation beneath the pride. She was quiet for a moment. Part of me felt satisfaction. Finally, you were experiencing some fraction of what I had felt for years. Finally, you understood what it meant to watch someone you loved slip away. And the other part? The other part felt grief. Because even then, even after everything, I didn't want to hurt you. I just wanted you to see me. Her voice caught. To actually see me. Not as a reflection of your power or a symbol of your success. As a person, partner, someone worthy of being loved for who I was rather than what I represented. I see you now, he said quietly. Every day, every moment. I know. She lifted her head to kiss his cheek. That's why I stayed. Later that night, after the children were asleep and the house had settled into peaceful silence, Vincenzo stood in the doorway of their bedroom, watching his wife brush her hair before the mirror. 20 years she had been part of his life now. More than half of those years had been struggle, pain, the slow collapse of everything they had built. But the rest, the years since their reconciliation, had been something else entirely. Growth, partnership, the daily choice to be better than the day before. You're staring, Serafina observed without turning. I'm admiring. Same thing, perhaps. He crossed to stand behind her, his hands settling on her shoulders. In the mirror, their reflections looked back. Older now, marked by time and experience, but still recognizable as the people who had exchanged vows beneath the olive trees. What are you thinking? She asked. That I'm grateful. For you, for the children, for the life we've built. His hands tightened slightly. For the fact that you gave me a chance when I didn't deserve one. She turned to face him. You worked for it, she said simply. Every day since that factory, you've worked for it. That's not nothing, Vincenzo. I nearly lost you, but you didn't. Because you were stronger than I ever gave you credit for. Because you had the courage to leave, and the wisdom to come back when you saw real change. She touched his face, tracing the lines that years had carved around his eyes. Do you remember what I said on our renewal day? About choosing you with full knowledge of your failures. I remember everything about that day. I meant it then. I mean it more now. Her eyes held his in the lamplight. You are not the man I married. You are not even the man who walked into that factory to save me. You are someone who has grown continuously, consistently, for over a decade. Someone who has proven, not through words, but through thousands of daily actions, that transformation is possible. With the right motivation. With any motivation that leads to genuine change. The source matters less than the result. She kissed him gently, and the result is a man I respect, a man I trust, a man I choose freely to spend my life with. He pulled her close. I love you, he said against her hair. I love you too. I will keep choosing you. Tomorrow, the day after, every day until my last. I know. She pulled back to meet his eyes. And I will keep choosing you right back. Some stories end with happily ever after. But the truest love stories, the ones that emerge from wreckage and rebuild something stronger, those stories don't end at all. They continue. One choice at a time. One day at a time. One act of love at a time. Vincenzo Malaspina had once believed that power meant control. That love meant possession. That strength meant never bending, never yielding, never showing weakness. He had been wrong about everything. True power, he had learned, was the ability to choose differently than the patterns demanded. True love was freely given and freely received, without ownership or debt. True strength was vulnerability, the courage to grow, to change, to become someone better even when every instinct screamed to stay safe behind walls. Serafina had taught him these lessons, not through words but through example. Through the quiet strength of a woman who had stopped waiting. Through the courage to leave what was destroying her. Through the grace to return when she saw genuine transformation. And through the wisdom to understand that some things, the best things, could never be possessed. Only chosen. Again and again and again. The end.